Pizzaverse Studios presents Hollywood, 1928. You just became the biggest star in America. You got money. You got fame. You got flashing cameras. You got a mansion. You got fans. And naturally, because history apparently enjoys chaos, you accidentally walk into the wrong speakeasy. Uh-oh. Now suddenly everybody's asking questions. Who owns the casino? Who's watching? Why is there a guy in a suit smiling too much? Why is everybody named Frankie, Joey, or Sal? Introducing Hollywood Reputation Insurance, the first emergency protection system specifically designed for movie stars, socialites, flappers, and people one bad newspaper headline away from absolute disaster. Features include emergency fake mustache disguise kit, portable backdoor escape map for all major speakeasies, one emergency suitcase full of unmarked cash, complimentary train ticket to someplace in Nevada where nobody asks questions, one exhausted publicist screaming, "Don't talk to the papers." But wait. Order now and you'll receive our bonus package. The Tabloid Damage Control Starter Kit TM includes dark sunglasses, stress cigarettes, a lawyer named Vinny, 3 bottles labeled for emotional emergencies only. Side effects may include paranoia, career collapse, existential dread, leaving Hollywood forever, and spontaneous desert relocation. Hollywood Reputation Insurance, because apparently becoming famous wasn't stressful enough. Protect your reputation before history starts acting funny. Viewer discretion is advised. This documentary is intended for commentary, historical storytelling, dramatic interpretation, satire, analysis, and entertainment purposes only. Nothing in this production should be interpreted as a formal legal accusation, a courtroom filing, a federal indictment, or some dusty morality clause paperwork dragged out of a dead studio executive's drawer. We are discussing Hollywood, tabloids, organized crime, exploitation, image destruction, and the kind of powerful men who could ruin a woman's life before breakfast and still make lunch reservations. So if you're one of those delicate little souls who thinks old Hollywood was all champagne, silk gowns, and innocent movie stars dancing under moonlight, buckle up, sweetheart. Because behind the glitter was a machine. Behind the machine were predators. And behind the predators was always somebody keeping a ledger. Now, unfortunately, we begin.
Clara Bow, the it girl Al Capone couldn't shoot. A Pizzaverse Studios original documentary. A Palermo production. Written by Bambi Palermo. Narrated by Vincent DiPrio. Hollywood sells a beautiful lie. A city of bright lights, red carpets, champagne glasses, flashbulbs exploding like fireworks, movie stars smiling beneath giant theater marquees, while millions of people stare up at the screen and dream. Dream of wealth. Dream of fame. Dream of escape. Dream of becoming untouchable. Because that's the promise, isn't it? That if you become famous enough, rich enough, beloved enough, the world suddenly stops being dangerous. People imagine celebrity as armor, like money builds walls. Like applause creates protection. Like becoming the most adored woman in America somehow places you above the predators waiting in the dark. But history tells a much uglier story. Because predators do not avoid bright lights, they move toward them. Power follows power. Greed follows opportunity. And in America, whenever large amounts of money start moving through a room, eventually somebody walks in carrying a ledger. The 1920s were sold to the public as an era of liberation. Jazz music. Flappers. Bootleg whiskey. Speakeasies. Excess. The Roaring Twenties. Everybody dancing while the stock market climbed toward heaven. But beneath all that glitter sat another America entirely. An America run in smoke-filled back rooms. An America where judges had prices. Where politicians had prices. Where newspapers had prices. Where police departments had prices. And where organized crime slowly realized something terrifying. You did not need to kill people anymore. Not physically. Not if you understood leverage. Not if you understood image. Not if you understood fear. Because bullets create investigations. Bullets create headlines. Bullets create federal attention. But reputations could be murdered quietly, carefully, professionally, and nobody ever saw fingerprints. Tonight we're talking about one of the most fascinating and tragic stories buried beneath old Hollywood mythology. A woman who had everything. A woman who climbed out of poverty and transformed herself into the face of an entire generation. The woman millions called the It Girl. She was electric. She was wild. She was modern. She represented freedom itself. And that made her valuable. Not just to Hollywood. To everyone. Including men who saw human beings the same way bankers see mortgages. As assets. As leverage. As property. Because somewhere between the flashing cameras and the underground speakeasies, between Hollywood and organized crime, between adoration and exploitation, Clara Bow walked into the wrong room. And after that, the machine never let her leave. She had the world at her feet until she walked into the wrong room. Hollywood's biggest star wasn't killed by a bullet. She was destroyed by ink. Al Capone didn't need to assassinate Clara Bow physically. He murdered her identity. The severe psychological toll ultimately drove her to abandon her career. This is how Hollywood's It Girl disappeared without a gunshot ever being fired. The It Girl and the Machine. But long before the mob set their trap, the Hollywood machine had already primed her for the fall. Clara Bow was the undisputed It Girl of the 1920s, generating millions for Paramount Pictures while projecting an image of ultimate carefree rebellion. But underneath the flapper dresses, she was a deeply traumatized survivor of childhood abuse, treated like an industrial asset by a studio system that worked her to exhaustion. Desperate for a release valve from the relentless cameras and controlling executives, she sought refuge in the underground speakeasies of Prohibition-era Los Angeles. She thought she was finally making her own choices. She did not realize these sanctuaries were secretly managed by the Chicago syndicate. Al Capone controlled the liquor, the gambling tables, and the men who watched the Hollywood elite throw away their paychecks. Capone did not care about motion pictures. He cared about leverage. When his men saw Clara Bow's frantic energy and her desperate need to escape reality, they recognized a perfect target. A movie star of her magnitude was not just another gambler looking for a distraction. She was an unprecedented opportunity. If they could get her on the hook, the possibilities were endless. The order came down through the ranks. Let her play. Make her feel welcome. Make her feel untouchable. The speakeasy mobsters executed a perfect psychological trap. They manipulated the house mechanics to feed Clara small, intoxicating victories, giving her a false sense of control. Once the hook was set deeply into her routine, the odds shifted. Chasing her losses exactly as the syndicate anticipated, Clara signed lines of credit with smiling pit bosses, until her small string of bad luck escalated into a catastrophic, insurmountable deficit. The period of grace was over. It was time for the collection. The ledger. The back room of the speakeasy was completely silent. The jazz band playing out front was muffled, reduced to a dull, distant thud through the heavy, reinforced doors. Clara Bow sat in a leather chair. Her hands were cold. The adrenaline of the casino floor had evaporated, leaving behind a sharp, metallic panic. The pit boss had not shouted. He had not threatened her. He had simply placed a hand on her shoulder and suggested they look at the ledger. She looked at the numbers written in neat black ink. They were impossible. She was the highest-paid actress at the studio, generating unprecedented box office returns. But the figure at the bottom of the page dwarfed her contracts. She had gambled away money she did not possess. She had signed markers on the assumption that her winning streaks would return. They had not. The house had executed a perfect mathematical bleed. The door opened. Al Capone walked in. He did not look like a monster. He wore a tailored suit. He smelled of expensive cologne and cigar smoke. He did not carry a weapon. He carried an air of absolute, unquestionable authority. He sat across from her. He did not yell. He did not break the furniture. He spoke with a calm, measured tone of a bank manager reviewing a defaulted mortgage. He outlined her situation. She owed his organization a fortune. If the debt became public, the studio would invoke the morality clause in her contract. They would terminate her employment immediately. The press would devour her. She would be bankrupt, disgraced, and unemployable before the end of the week. He laid out the reality of her ruin with surgical precision. Clara panicked. She offered to sell her assets. She offered to sign over portions of her future salaries. She scrambled for a lifeline, desperately trying to negotiate with a man who already owned her completely. Capone held up a hand. He told her he did not want her money. He knew she could not liquidate her assets fast enough, and a payment plan was bad business. Capone offered to hold the debt indefinitely in exchange for her presence at his private gatherings, effectively leveraging her fame to entertain his associates. Capone was expanding his empire. He needed to secure supply lines, influence local legislation, and maintain the loyalty of the men who kept him out of federal prison. He dealt with corrupt judges, crooked police commissioners, and ambitious politicians. These men had money, they had power, but they were greedy and they were vain. The private gatherings. Capone knew how to exploit vanity. He did not just offer them bribes, he offered them access to the untouchable. A week later, Clara Bow attended her first private gathering. It was held in a secure suite at a luxury hotel. The room was thick with smoke. The men in the room were older, heavy-set, wearing expensive suits with sweat on their collars. They were the architects of municipal corruption. They were men who signed zoning permits, dismissed criminal charges, and looked the other way when shipments of illegal Canadian whiskey crossed the border. Clara walked in. The conversation stopped. She was the it girl. She was the fantasy projected on thousands of silver screens across the country. And now she was pouring their bourbon. She was lighting their cigars. She was sitting at their tables, forced to smile at their crude jokes and endure their lingering stares. Capone watched from the corner of the room. He did not touch her. He did not have to. His possession of her was absolute and entirely visible. When an alderman looked at Clara Bow, he was not just looking at a beautiful woman. He was looking at a demonstration of Capone's supreme power. The message was unmistakable. Al Capone is a man who can buy the most famous woman in the world and use her to fetch your drink. The psychological degradation was instant and profound. Clara had fought her way out of the slums of Brooklyn to become a star. She had endured the grueling, abusive factory conditions of the studio system to earn her independence. The contrast between her public life and her private reality began to tear her mind apart. By day, she arrived at the Paramount lot. She stepped under the blinding Klieg lights. The director shouted for action. She projected the wild, carefree, rebellious spirit that the public adored. She kissed leading men. She danced. She was the ultimate symbol of the modern, liberated woman. By night, a black car waited for her. Outside her home. The driver did not speak. He drove her to underground clubs, private mansions, and secured hotel suites. She stepped into rooms filled with the worst men in the city. She became a servant to the syndicate. She had to maintain the facade. If she looked miserable, Capone's associates would be insulted. The value of the bribe was in the illusion that she wanted to be there. She had to use her acting skills not for a camera, but for her own survival. She faked the laughs. She faked the charm. She forced herself to be the sparkling center of attention in rooms where men discussed extortion, bribery, and murder. Clara had to evade her own studio security to meet her obligations to the mob. She was living a double life, trapped between two ruthless systems of control. The studio owned her image. Capone owned her reputation. The moment that broke her, she tried to push back. During one of the private dinners, a high-ranking city official made a crass, aggressive advance. Clara refused him. She stood up, her temper flaring, and prepared to leave the room. Capone intercepted her before she reached the door. He did not raise his voice. He stepped into her personal space. He reminded her of the ledger. He reminded her of the exact dollar amount she owed. He reminded her of the morality clause in her contract. He told her that if she walked out that door, the newspapers would have a copy of her gambling debts before sunrise. He told her she would be penniless and unemployable. He instructed her to turn around, walk back to the table, and apologize to the official. Clara looked at him and saw the absolute absence of empathy. He operated strictly on calculated leverage. She turned around. She walked back to the table. She forced a smile and apologized to the man who had just insulted her. That moment broke something fundamental inside her. She realized she was not a debtor working off a loan. She was a hostage. The debt was designed to be unpayable. Capone was not interested in recovering the money. The money was irrelevant to him. A strategic asset. He was interested in maintaining a permanent hold over a strategic asset. As long as she owed the debt, she was his property. The speakeasies were no longer a refuge. They were the bars of her cell. Every time she poured a drink for a corrupt judge, she felt her dignity being chipped away. Every time she was forced to pose for a photograph with a rival mob boss, she felt her soul eroding. She was a trophy mounted on Capone's wall. The isolation was total. She could not go to the police. The men she was serving drinks to were the police. She could not go to the studio bosses. They would abandon her the second the scandal threatened their profit margins. She was entirely alone in a city of millions. Clara knew she could not survive this existence. If she continued to live as a captive ornament for the Chicago syndicate, she would eventually lose her mind completely. She had to sever the chain. She had to find a way to clear the ledger and remove Capone's leverage. She began to quietly assess her finances. She looked at her properties. She looked at her jewelry. She calculated what she could liquidate without drawing the attention of the studio accountants or the press. She needed a massive sum of liquid cash, and she needed it fast. She formulated a plan to buy back her life. She was preparing to confront the most dangerous man in America and demand her freedom. She did not know that confronting a man like Al Capone was not a negotiation. It was an act of war. The buyback. She tried to buy back her life. Not with lawyers. Not with studio connections. Not with headlines. With cash. To survive, Clara executed a desperate financial miracle. She secretly liquidated her life, pawning diamond necklaces and offloading real estate to hoard a small fortune in untraceable bills. Convinced that the mob operated like any other business, she believed a massive cash payment could buy back her freedom. She made a phone call to a discreet number she had been given. She did not ask to speak to Capone. He was insulated, untouchable. She requested a meeting with his primary lieutenant in Los Angeles, the man who managed the collections and organized the private dinners. The meeting was set for midnight in a private room at the back of an exclusive, heavily guarded speakeasy. Clara arrived carrying a heavy leather briefcase. She wore a dark coat, a wide-brimmed hat pulled low over her face. She was trembling. She walked past the jazz band, past the crowded roulette tables where the trap had first been sprung, and was escorted by two silent, broad-shouldered men into the back room. The lieutenant sat behind a desk. He was a sharply dressed, impeccably groomed man with dead, unblinking eyes. He managed the syndicate collections in Los Angeles. He did not stand when she entered. He simply gestured to the chair across from him. Clara sat down. She did not speak. She lifted the heavy leather briefcase, placed it on the desk, and popped the brass latches. She opened the lid. The stacks of currency were neatly arranged, representing the liquidation of years of her sweat and trauma on the studio lots. "It's a quarter of the total," Clara said, her voice shaking despite her desperate attempt to sound firm. "In cash, untraceable. I want off the rotation. I'll pay the rest, but I'm done attending the dinners. I am done pouring the drinks." The lieutenant looked at the briefcase. He did not reach for the money. He did not smile. He leaned back in his chair and looked at Clara with an expression of mild clinical curiosity, as if he were observing a laboratory mouse attempting to negotiate its way out of a maze. The silence stretched for agonizing seconds. The faint, muffled sound of a trumpet playing a frantic jazz solo bled through the walls. "Close the case, Miss Bow," the lieutenant finally said. His voice was soft, devoid of any anger or malice. It was the absolute lack of emotion that made the words so terrifying. Clara froze. "It's cash," she stammered. "It's a down payment. It proves I'm good for it." The lieutenant refused the cash with profound boredom. He explained that the syndicate was not a bank, and the money was irrelevant to Al Capone. The true value of her debt was leverage. Having the most famous woman in the world pour scotch for corrupt city officials made those men feel powerful, guaranteeing the syndicate millions in untroubled illegal commerce. Her debt was mathematically unpayable by design. They did not want her money. They wanted to own her completely. The trap was never about money. Clara's hands gripped the armrests of her chair. A wave of absolute freezing despair washed over her. "And if I refuse," she whispered, "if I walk into the press tomorrow and tell them everything?" The lieutenant finally smiled. It was a chilling, razor-thin expression. "You won't because you are an actress and you understand the power of an audience. If you refuse, we will not send men to break your legs. We will not harm a single hair on your head. We will simply hand your ledger to the editors of the most prominent scandal sheets in the country. We will provide them with a detailed, heavily embellished account of your gambling habits. But we won't stop there." He leaned closer, the smell of peppermint and stale tobacco washing over her. "We own the presses just as surely as we own the casinos. We will manufacture a campaign of absolute filth. We will invent stories of depravity so severe, so grotesque, that the studio will cancel your contract before the ink is dry on the morning edition. The public will demand your exile. We will turn your name into a punchline for the gutter." He gestured toward the briefcase. "Take your money, Miss Bow. Buy yourself something pretty. You have a dinner to attend Thursday night. Wear the red silk dress. They like the red silk." Clara closed the briefcase. The brass latches snapped shut with a sound like a guillotine dropping. She picked up the heavy leather bag. It no longer felt like a weapon of salvation. It felt like an anchor. Character assassination. She walked out of the room past the guards, past the roulette tables, and out into the cool Los Angeles night. She climbed into the back of her car. She did not cry. The fear was too deep for tears. It was a cold, paralyzing dread. She realized the absolute brilliance of the trap Capone had built. He had weaponized her own fame against her. He knew that the only thing she feared more than the mob was the loss of the public's adoration. The public had saved her from the slums. The public's love was the only validation she had ever known. And Capone held the power to turn that love into absolute vitriolic hatred with a few phone calls to his bought and paid for editors. She was not just a hostage to a financial debt. She was a hostage to her own image. The mob understood that in the modern era of mass media, physical assassination was sloppy and drew federal heat. Character assassination was clean, highly effective, entirely untraceable. They could murder her career, destroy her mind, and walk away without leaving a single fingerprint. Following her failed attempt to buy her freedom, the syndicate tightened the leash, pushing Clara to the precipice of total psychological collapse. And sitting behind a massive desk in Chicago, Al Capone watched the situation unfold with cold satisfaction. He decided the ledger needed to be closed. Not with cash. Not with mercy. With destruction. He picked up the telephone. He dialed the numbers of the most ruthless tabloid editors in America. He gave the order. And the execution began. The execution by newspaper. Al Capone gave the order, and the media apparatus moved with the brutal efficiency of a military strike. Major newspaper syndicates, quietly subsidized by Chicago cash, launched a coordinated tabloid assault. Overnight, the protective, admiring lens through which the press had always viewed Clara was shattered. The headlines were not merely gossip. They were targeted, weaponized, slander. They did not attack her acting. They attacked the core pillars of her public persona. The syndicate understood exactly what made Clara Bow popular. Her image as an independent, carefree, modern woman. To destroy her, they had to pervert that image into something grotesque and dangerous to the moral fabric of the country. The first wave of articles focused on financial instability and alleged debts, planting the seed of irresponsibility. But by the third day, the narrative escalated into sheer character assassination. The tabloids published entirely fabricated accounts of depraved, drug-fueled parties at her Beverly Hills estate. They printed anonymous quotes from supposed insiders detailing a woman who was mentally unhinged, dangerous to work with, and fundamentally immoral. They invented scandals involving multiple men, framing her not as a liberated woman, but as a predator. Clara woke up, walked to her front door, and found newspapers piled on her porch. She read the headlines. The blood drained from her face. She recognized the precise, calculated nature of the attack. She remembered the cold words spoken in the back room of the speakeasy. "We will manufacture a campaign of absolute filth. We will turn your name into a punchline for the gutter." The campaign had begun, and America was already watching. Hollywood turns its back. A coordinated tabloid smear campaign embedded itself into the minds of millions of Americans. The reaction from the studio was instantaneous. Paramount Pictures operated on a strict risk-reward ratio. Clara Bow had been their most valuable asset, generating millions of dollars. But studio executives were deeply paranoid men, terrified of morality leagues and government censors. The moment the tabloids hit their desks, Clara transitioned from prized asset to corporate liability. She was summoned immediately. No smiles. No greetings. No concern. The studio head sat behind his desk with stacks of newspapers spread before him. He never asked whether the stories were true. Truth no longer mattered. Only perception. He pointed toward the morality clause in her contract. The exact clause Capone had used against her. He informed her that her production was being suspended. Publicity support withdrawn. Future projects frozen. She was being quarantined. And if the stories continued, they would terminate her entirely. Sue her. Erase her. Clara stood there, completely numb, watching two machines coordinate her destruction without speaking a single word to one another. Chicago supplied the poison. Hollywood administered the dose. The city becomes a prison. She returned to Beverly Hills. But the estate no longer felt like a home. It felt like a fortress under siege. Reporters camped outside her gates. Photographers climbed walls. Telephones rang constantly. And every answer brought a new horror. Hostile journalists. Anonymous threats. Or worse, silence. Heavy breathing. A quiet reminder from Chicago that they were still watching. The handlers vanished. The directors disappeared. Friends stopped calling. Co-stars evaporated overnight. Clara had become radioactive. And the cruelest part? The private gatherings continued. Even while they systematically destroyed her public life, the debt collection never stopped. The black sedan still arrived. The club still waited. The smoke still hung in the air. Only now the atmosphere had changed. The men who once looked at Clara with awe now looked at her with vulgar contempt. The tabloids had transformed her. She was no longer Hollywood royalty. Now she was the scandal. Now she was entertainment. Now she was humiliation. The fracture. The physical toll manifested rapidly. She stopped eating. She relied almost entirely on prescription barbiturates. The spark in her eyes vanished. The vibrant electricity that once captivated millions faded, replaced by the stare of a hunted animal. The public turned vicious. Working-class audiences who once projected their dreams onto Clara now projected resentment. Letters arrived by the thousands. Hateful. Cruel. Merciless. Civic groups demanded boycotts. Strangers shouted insults at her from passing cars. The world itself became hostile territory. She could not work. She could not sleep. She could not leave. And slowly the boundaries between reality and nightmare dissolved. She began suffering auditory hallucinations. At night she heard printing presses, voices, whispers. The sound of newspapers being manufactured in empty rooms. She finally understood something horrifying. The lieutenant had been right. They never needed guns. They never needed fingerprints. They never needed violence. They simply took the machinery that built her and threw it into reverse. They used fame itself as the murder weapon. The only move left. In a moment of pure, desperate clarity, Clara understood something. The debt was never supposed to be paid. The smear campaign was never meant to stop. Capone wasn't teaching her a lesson. He was making an example, demonstrating power, showing rivals, politicians, studio executives that his reach was limitless. There would be no rescue. The studio would not save her. The police would not save her. The police chiefs were the men she poured drinks for. She looked around her bedroom floor. Newspapers everywhere. Headlines. Smears. Mockery. Humiliation. And sitting among the ruins, Clara made the only choice left. She decided to burn down her own cell. If they were going to strip away her career, her dignity, her reputation, then she would strip away their leverage. She could not beat the Chicago syndicate, but she could remove herself from the board. This wasn't a strategy for victory. It was a strategy for survival. Through absolute surrender, she prepared for the final desperate act of the It Girl. A complete disappearance. The only move left. In a moment of pure, desperate clarity, Clara understood something. The debt was never supposed to be paid. The smear campaign was never meant to stop. Capone wasn't teaching her a lesson. He was making an example, demonstrating power, showing rivals, politicians, studio executives that his reach was limitless. There would be no rescue. The studio would not save her. The police would not save her. The police chiefs were the men she poured drinks for. She looked around her bedroom floor. Newspapers everywhere. Headlines. Smears. Mockery. Humiliation. And sitting among the ruins, Clara made the only choice left. She decided to burn down her own cell. If they were going to strip away her career, her dignity, her reputation, then she would strip away their leverage. She could not beat the Chicago syndicate, but she could remove herself from the board. This wasn't a strategy for victory. It was a strategy for survival. Through absolute surrender, she prepared for the final desperate act of the It Girl. A complete disappearance. Professional suicide. The Beverly Hills estate, once a glittering monument to Clara Bow's rise from the Brooklyn slums, had transformed into a mausoleum. The curtains remained shut. The telephones screamed endlessly. The rooms sat in silence. And Clara sat on the floor, staring into nothing. Survival no longer meant paying the debt. Survival no longer meant fighting the tabloids. Survival no longer meant protecting the career she spent years building. Because the brutal coordinated assault had vaporized every option she had left. The tabloids had executed the character assassination. The studio had withdrawn protection. The mob controlled the debt. The politicians. The newspapers. the narrative, everything. And somewhere inside that exhaustion, Clara finally understood the true mechanics of blackmail. A blackmailer's power only exists as long as the victim has something left they desperately want to protect. A reputation. A secret. A career. A public identity. Capone was holding Clara Bow, the movie star, hostage. So Clara made a horrifying calculation. If she destroyed the hostage herself, the leverage disappeared. If there was no career, there was nothing left to threaten. If there was no it girl, there was no idol left to destroy. It was a strategy of absolute surrender. Professional suicide in exchange for biological survival. And for the first time in weeks, she felt calm. Not hopeful. Not happy. Just cold certainty. She stopped trying to save Clara Bow. She started trying to save Clara. Burning down the empire. She dressed carefully. No glamorous dresses. No sparkling jewelry. No Hollywood image. No it girl. She wore a conservative dark suit. A hat with a veil. The outfit looked more appropriate for a funeral. Because professionally, that is exactly where she was going. One final trip. One final appearance. One final goodbye. She walked into the Paramount offices and bypassed her dressing room. No fanfare. No makeup artists. No photographers. No smiling assistants. Straight to the executive office. The studio head barely looked up. Before he could begin another lecture involving morality clauses and headlines, Clara spoke. Flat. Emotionless. I am breaking my contract. The executive laughed. Threatened lawsuits. Threatened financial destruction. Threatened litigation. Threatened poverty. Clara never reacted. I know. She stared directly at him. Keep the money. Keep the royalties. Draft the papers. I will sign today. The machinery moved fast. Corporate machines always do. Within an hour, she signed away millions. Future earnings. Future rights. Future opportunities. And as she walked out of the building into the California sun, for the first time in weeks, she breathed. Deeply. A broken toy. But there was still one problem. Capone still owned the ledger. The black sedan still arrived. The invitations still came. The syndicate still believed she had value. So Clara engineered one final performance. Not for Hollywood. For survival. That night, the sedan arrived exactly on schedule. The driver said nothing. Clara climbed in. The route was familiar. Underground rooms. Concrete staircases. Smoke. Cards. Corruption. Another gathering. Another room filled with judges, officials, and powerful men. But this time something had changed. When Clara entered the room, the conversation slowed. Not because of beauty, because of discomfort. The famous smile was gone. The glamour gone. The electricity gone. No makeup. No sparkle. No red silk dress. Just pale skin. Dark circles. A vacant expression. A ghost. She moved slowly. Mechanically. Like a machine that had finally burned out. She poured drinks. Never smiled. Never laughed. Never played the role. One judge grabbed her wrist. "Now smile, sweetheart. You're supposed to entertain." Clara looked directly into his face and felt absolutely nothing. No anger. No fear. Nothing. The judge let go immediately, because staring back at him was not a movie star. It was a corpse standing upright. From the corner of the room, the lieutenant watched silently. He understood leverage, and he recognized a depleted asset. The studio contract was gone. The public image gone. The glamour gone. And now the social value was gone too. She had become useless. Not because she fought back. Because she had burned herself down. Account closed. At 3 a.m, Clara returned home. No speeches, no tears, no hesitation. She packed a single leather suitcase. Not gowns, not furs, not jewels, not the life of Clara Bow. Just durable clothing, sweaters, boots, cash, necessities. She walked through the mansion one final time. The chandeliers, the artwork, the grand piano. All monuments to victory, all monuments to imprisonment. She felt nothing. She left the keys behind. Left the deeds, left the estate, left Clara Bow. And disappeared into the night. Hours later, the lieutenant sat reviewing weekly records. A subordinate informed him. The Beverly Hills property was empty. The asset had vanished. The lieutenant didn't panic. No screaming, no hit squads, no baseball bats, no threats. Just calculations. He called his studio contact. Verified the reports. Clara had terminated everything. No contracts, no future earnings, no value, no leverage. He opened the heavy ledger. Turned to Clara Bow's page. Examined the impossible debt. Reached for a red fountain pen. And drew a thick line across her name. Then wrote 2 words. Account closed. The desert. Nevada. Miles from cameras. Miles from telephones. Miles from Chicago. Miles from Hollywood. Miles from Clara Bow. The silence hit her harder than violence ever could. No jazz. No screaming crowds. No cameras. No printing presses. No smoke-filled rooms. Just wind. Desert. Isolation. She had escaped. Technically. But trauma doesn't care about geography. Trauma packs its own suitcase. Even at the remote ranch, Clara waited. For footsteps. For knocking. For headlights. For Capone. For shadows. The war ended. But her mind never got the message. Morale. History teaches a brutal lesson. We are taught that fame protects people, that money creates freedom, that celebrity builds walls. But predators do not avoid light. They move toward it. Clara Bow wasn't destroyed because she lacked success. She was destroyed because success made her valuable. And in systems built around leverage, human beings stop becoming people. They become assets. The terrifying thing isn't organized crime. The terrifying thing is realizing how many systems operate exactly the same way. Clara Bow outlived Al Capone. But survival and victory are not always the same thing. Sometimes winning simply means escaping alive. And sometimes the price of freedom is walking away from everything you built. The brightest stars often cast the darkest shadows. And behind every empire, somebody is always keeping score. Somewhere, someone is always holding a ledger. If you enjoyed this descent into old Hollywood darkness, forgotten history, crime, corruption, and the ugly machinery hiding behind glamorous myths, subscribe to the channel. Because around here, we don't just tell stories. We dig through smoke. We dig through lies. We dig through the stuff people buried under decades of polish and public relations. And trust me, there's always another locked room. And seriously, thank you for hanging out with us. Because out of all the documentaries, videos, rabbit holes, conspiracy boards, history channels, cat videos, internet arguments, and algorithm insanity on this giant digital carnival ride, you ended up here. That means something. The Pizzaverse has always been about asking questions, digging deeper, laughing when things get ridiculous, and pulling back the curtain when everybody else is staring at the stage lights. Without you guys, this whole thing is just a bunch of scripts, coffee, insomnia, and two lunatics sitting around talking into microphones. You guys built this thing. You support it. You keep it alive. So from all of us at Pizzaverse Studios and Palermo Productions, thank you for watching. Thank you for hanging out. Thank you for supporting the channel. And remember, this is the Pizzaverse. We don't rewrite history. We excavate it. Clara Bow. Brooklyn kid walks into Hollywood, accidentally becomes one of the biggest stars on Earth, turns into the face of an entire decade, and discovers fame comes with a hidden clause nobody reads. America looked at Clara and saw freedom, glamour, and endless champagne energy. Hollywood looked at Clara and saw dollar signs. Everybody wanted a piece. Poor kid climbed out of the mud and became a legend, only to find out success sometimes comes with every shark in the ocean circling the boat. Absolute tragedy. Al Capone walks around in expensive suits, smelling like cigars and confidence, talks like a businessman, smiles like your friendly neighborhood banker. Meanwhile, half the country is quietly going. Should we be concerned? Capone was basically what happens when organized crime gets a management team and starts thinking in spreadsheets. Guy didn't just collect money. He collected leverage. Real warm fella. See you at the next one.
The Midwest, where the corn grows tall, the winters are brutal. And sometimes the guys running the local trucking company know a little more about business than they should. For decades, from Chicago to Milwaukee to Kansas City and Omaha, certain gentlemen in nice suits handled problems quietly, very quietly. And now, you can bring that same heartland problem-solving tradition into your own home. Introducing the Midwest Mob Problem Solver Kit, the only household product inspired by the legendary operations of the American Midwest. Inside every box you'll receive the Union Hall negotiation table, perfect for discussing contracts, debts, or who exactly forgot to pay their gambling tab. The Cornfield Privacy Guarantee, because sometimes certain conversations require a very quiet location. The Teamster's Timekeeper Stopwatch, used to measure exactly how long it takes someone to suddenly remember the truth. And of course, the Midwest Ledger of Favors, because around here, nobody forgets who owes who. But wait, there's more. Order today and we'll include the Emergency Alibi Generator, Midwest Edition. Spin the dial and instantly receive classic excuses like, I was at the bowling league. I was helping my cousin move snow. I was at the church fish fry. Or the Midwest Classic. I don't know nothing about that. Thousands of satisfied customers from Chicago to Kansas City agree. Sometimes problems don't require lawyers. Sometimes they just require the Midwest Mob Problem Solver Kit. Available now. Exclusively from Pizzaverse Studios and Palermo Productions. Because when things get complicated, the Midwest has always had a way of keeping things nice and quiet.
I'll pick my battles cause I know I'm gonna win the war. I'm not rattled cause I shattered all of this before. Steadier than steel cause I'm ready with my shield and sword. Back on the saddle cause I gathered all my strength for more. And I won't bow, I won't break. No, I'm not afraid to do whatever it takes. I'll never bow, I'll never break. Cause I'm a warrior, I'll fight for my life like a soldier, all through the night. And I won't give up, I will survive, I'm a warrior. And I'm stronger, that's why I'm alive. I will conquer, time after time, I'll never falter. I will survive, I'm a warrior. Viking, I'll be fighting through the day and night. I'll be marching through the darkness till the morning light. Even when it's hard, I like the armor, you will see me shine. No, I won't stop and I won't drop until the victory's mine. And I won't bow, I won't break. No, I'm not afraid to do whatever it takes. I'll never bow, I'll never break. 'Cause I'm a warrior, I'll fight for my life like a soldier, all through the night, and I won't give up. I will survive, I'm a warrior. And I'm stronger, that's why I'm alive. I will conquer, time after time, I'll never falter. I will survive, I'm a warrior. Oh, oh, you can't shoot me down, you can't stop me now. I've got a whole damn army. Oh, you try to break me down, you try to take me out. You can't cut or scar me. Warrior, I'll fight for my life like a soldier, all through the night, and I won't give up. I will survive, I'm a warrior.